oh, we weren't accounting for things correctly. It eventually led to us being way over our skis, and it was just a huge mess. No, I was no genius in business and didn't have any idea for any great new product.
It's only when things go bad. There were things that we probably should have been doing differently that we just didn't know any better, in that particular deal.
Suffering can mean anything to anyone. But like at the end of the day, you're going to suffer and you just got to suck it up. You just keep going.
Today, you're hearing from Harrison Bonner. He built a real estate business the way a lot of operators do. One deal at a time, moving up the ladder from simple deals to more complex. Everything was going great until it wasn't, which is what so often happens in business. He scaled fast and then didn't realize that the tides were turning. He kept thinking the next move was the right move, only to be rebuffed time and time again. They were going to refinance, repay the short-term money, then interest rate doubles, cash out refinances turned into adding cash into closings, and the debt stack started breathing down their neck. We talk about how he owned this, how they're cleaning it up, and the lessons that he learned. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Harrison.
My partner and I have been in the real estate investing and developing world for about a decade now. We, sort of stair-stepped our way up the ladder of door knocking, pre-foreclosures to get short sale deals, wholesaling those contracts. Bought our very first house flip that way. Eventually worked up into doing new construction, for sale products. We were located in Massachusetts, so this was kind of Boston Metro to start. I became a licensed general contractor, so we started self-performing all of our construction management. We were doing all these crazy, new builds and really challenging renovations for, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 condo builds for the first 5 or 6 years of our career. So really just worked our way up sort of that scale. And then about 5 years ago, we started acquiring mid-size multifamily buildings. And when I say mid-size, typically 10 to 20 units in size, but properties that needed improvement. We had really cut our teeth on property renovations and really understood the construction aspect of property improvement. We thought pretty well. And so we applied that knowledge to the multifamily value add space and started buying value add multifamily that needed improvement. And that became our focus for really the past 3 or 4 years, which ultimately has kind of led us to where we are. But yeah, that's a bit of our background.
It's the prototypical real estate stair step. You know what I mean? You start out with this wholesale real low and flipping there, and then you stair step your way up to those next levels. When you started, did you just start and think, oh, I've seen some people have success flipping, and you just thought you're going to flip and you just naturally stair, or did you have a plan for getting to these levels or doing these next things?
Great question. It maybe resembled a plan, maybe not a great one, but we always had aspirations, to be a big company. Our big, hairy, audacious goal was to build a tower, change a city skyline, from very early on.
Yeah.
No idea how we were going to get there, and I think the road is going to be a little bit longer than we anticipated, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, we never wanted to be like a mom and pop just house flipper. I was no genius in business and didn't have any idea for any great new product. Like all 23-year-olds, they tell you that they sucker you into everyone gets rich in real estate. I said that sounds good. It turns out it's also a great way to lose money.
Yeah. I would say business is, we joke I joke with people all the time of business is easy until it's not, right? And
Yeah.
and we're all gonna hit that it's not thing. So from your guys' perspective, sounds like you guys hit some, bumpy waters. I know that even going back, but let's just specifically talk about kind of those bumpy waters with where you're currently at and what you've kind of been working through. Can you kind of just like summarize? You raised a bit of money for kind of this value add deal, and let's start at the beginning with that of like what was what was your thesis? What, from a financial perspective, did you see like what the potential outcome was? And then we'll transition after we set that foundation to where it is now.
Sure. So, our thesis on the value add side was that we were going to buy these buildings for $30,000 to $50,000 a unit. We're going to renovate these and be all in. Kind of the targeted all in per unit was somewhere in the range of $80,000 to $100,000 per unit. These are emerging markets. They're older buildings. We weren't building $700,000 condos anymore. We were doing kind of like affordable entry level apartments that were clean, safe, and habitable in some emerging markets of Massachusetts. And our plan was, and these properties we were appraising in the $120,000 to $135,000 per unit range. And so we saw a pretty good spread there. And the way we had traditionally financed all of our house flips or condominium developments in prior years wasn't now what I'm, very well educated in. We didn't have like a fund structure, like a GP LP structure where we were offering equity and, waterfall payouts and things like that. We just did debt. We just said, hey, we'll go find a hard money lender or bank or whoever's going to finance sort of the initial piece. And then we'll go to our friends, family, and people in network and say, hey, I'm doing this project. I'll pay you 12% and I'll pay you back when it's done. Oh, you're interested in loaning $100,000 and I'll put you on this project. So that's how we raised money for years, and it worked really well. I think we were probably benefiting from the upswing in like a general market and Boston, and sort of covered things that it probably we were able to cover a lot of mistakes because we didn't realize they were mistakes because of all of our earlier projects were doing well. And so we carry that same capital strategy into the multifamily space. But instead of repaying those, what are effectively like limited partners, but just sort of junior debt partners, instead of repaying them on a sale, we thought there was enough spread to be able to repay them on a refinance of the property. And if not, we at least cover like 80-90% of what was owed, and then the rest would sort of stay attached. And then, we'd own an asset that ideally was, had been improved. We had placed tenants in, was cash flowing, and we could, hold for another 3, 5, 10 years and, be in a comfortable position. That was our strategy, and we, I think we got in a 2-year period, we bought like 9 or 10 deals. Like we bought a lot really quickly.
Real real quickly, going back, did you raise with we're gonna buy this set number of deals, or did you just raise as you needed the money?
No, deal by deal basis. Yeah,
Okay.
deal by deal basis. And one of the biggest issues was that we were. I kind of described it where to someone once, maybe it was you, but it was like we had we had records of everything, but they weren't really organized. It was kind of just like they were scattered all over the floor.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to do at that time, and we're in a much better place now. We've made a ton of progress, but was really trying to take all that information and organize it cleanly and neatly. And that was one of the biggest issues that we had. We were just we were rolling what would have been payouts from past deals into new deals, and we weren't accounting for things correctly, and certain projects like that maybe were more successful than others would cover the ones that weren't as successful, and it was just a huge mess that we weren't managing. That management piece, like on the ground, we were managing it really well. I was work boots on every day, on site all the time, but that back end infrastructure that we needed just wasn't there. and we just kept raising deal by deal by deal, and it eventually led to us being way over our skis. That mismanagement just compounded, and then led us to a point where we were like, we're over leveraged. Our projects aren't making progress the way we need to. If we can get our portfolio to the position that we need it to be, we could cover all this. But now we have just a giant debt stack that's breathing down our neck, and we need to find a way to pivot. And we need to pivot that capital structure, and try to put ourselves in a position to get over that, which we haven't quite ultimately made it over that, and a lot of the portfolio is being sold off. So I can kind of get into that next part, but
Yeah,
I'll
let's pause there. So when you started, the thinking was, and again, I'm just summarizing this to go back of like you'd had success with a certain thing that we do, and we then assume from that success, oh, we're just doing stuff right, so we're going to go in and repeat that. So you're going in and you're starting to repeat it, and then it's only when things go bad that you're like, oh, there were things that we probably should have been doing differently that we just didn't know any better, in that particular deal. And I think that's such an interesting thing because when we have the success, it's always chalked up to we're so great, right? But then when we have the failure, it's easy to get in that failure and feel like, oh, I'm horrible. Like I can't do anything right. But the reality is that major shift from what I'm understanding was not, well, you're just a failure. The major shift was there were other market conditions and things that happened that caused you to get to that point where, oh, now you have this debt stack. So can we talk about that real quickly? Because like for people that aren't in real estate, that aren't doing this sort of stuff, this may be a little bit foreign in what that looks like. So can you kind of talk about like why was it good? And like you modeled it out at the beginning, everything looks good. It was good on historical stuff, and then now you get into the midst of it. What were the things that caused it to now get to the point where you're like, oh, this is not good, right?
great question. I think maybe some years and dates would bring some
Yeah, true. Yeah, go for it.
will bring some clarity to some of this. So we started in the very beginning of 2016. So we're riding this wave, this upward into the right wave of 2016 through 2021. We started buying all of these multifamilies and building our portfolio of rental properties, which are all mainly in like one emerging market of Massachusetts, between the very beginning of 2020 and the end of 2021. Money is, and that, at that time, money is free flowing, coming out of everyone's pores, through from all the COVID stimulus and 0% interest rates. And, it wasn't necessarily that we were getting 3% loans from banks, but when you just have capital sort of flowing from the top, it finds its way into all these other areas very easily. So that allowed us to just buy all these buildings that needed a bunch of work, and we were working our way through them. But then when it came time to refinance these assets that we felt were more stabilized at the time, now we're kind of crossing into 22 and 23, which, as anyone who's in real estate, especially commercial real estate, knows that that's when interest rates really started to increase incredibly quickly. And loans that we were expecting to close at high threes, low 4% interest rate range were now 7, 8, 9%, for a similar loan from the same sort of bank or agency or whatever.
This goes back to you'd mentioned at the first, instead of like a more traditional structure, you had the debt, you'd modeled it so that when you got to this refinance, that debt was now repaid. But if that interest rate change is what it is, now that modeling does not work, right? And so it was that we'd had these low rates. You get these low rates for this long period of time. It lulls you into this like you're going to continue with these low rates. And you know, if the timing had been slightly different, it wouldn't have been a bad bet at all, right? But then now the timing is one thing, and those rates go up, and then now that's where you're at here, and kind of continue on there. Sorry.
Percent. That's exactly what happened. I remember a loan that we thought We probably could have gotten, normally when you refinance, you cash out, some equity or depending on where you're at, we probably thought we'd cash out $300,000 or $400,000 if we were projecting this in 2020 or 2021. By the time we got to close the refinance at the end of 23 and 24, we ended up putting in $150,000 to close this loan. So that's a huge, cash flow swing. That we certainly were not expecting and prepared for. That was, though that in combination with how we didn't really realize how we had structured ourselves, how it could hit us in a negative way, really kind of sent us into this spiral that we have been trying to course correct, for a couple of years. And is probably going to take a bit longer than we initially planned on now. But our course correction was effectively was to say, okay, well, and this was before we decided to sell everything and kind of get what we can out of it, which is where we're at now. But around 20, late 23, early 24, when we were really feeling the effects of these low LTVs and this debt stack that was kind of breathing down our neck, we said, okay, well, all these debt partners are short term. These are 1, 2, 3 year loans. They're up. We're on extensions. These people want to be repaid. What if we pivoted and we said, instead of having all these different entities and all these different loan timelines with all these private creditors, what if we put our entire portfolio underneath now what we know to be like a fund structure, and kind of do raise the capital that we need to stabilize the rest of our portfolio, and then use a portion of capital to do like a debt for equity swap to then now have equity partners long term and then grow above and beyond this. That was kind of our plan. Unfortunately, what was most important was the rate that we could raise capital. And for the first 6-12 months, we felt like we were kind of ramping up. We were doing okay. We were having some successes. We were getting some LPs. We were cleaning up our books. We now are feeling really good about all this. But we really needed to hit certain capital milestones within a certain period of time, or we were just going to burn through all of the spare cash that we had, and our portfolio was not in a position to be able to service all of its debt. And if we couldn't outrun that debt, then it was just gonna eat us up. And eventually we got to the point where we said, okay, well, unless someone drops like a really, really large LP that doesn't fit our model for the partners that we're bringing in, drops a ton of capital into this bucket very, very quickly, then any additional capital we raise, we can't honestly tell anyone that it's going to good use, because now we're starting to get overrun. So that was when we made the decision to cut off the capital raising and work to exit as many deals as made sense in our portfolio, to try and recapture whatever we could, so that we could get better footing underneath ourselves and find a way to move forward after.
Yeah, I think you laid that out very well. You hit this moment where you realize, okay, things are not what we expected it to be. So you found this alternative route that, okay, we're going to raise this money, and then if we change the structure, we have the ability to work our way out of this. It's going to extend the timelines, but we still have the ability to turn this into a positive. So I want to kind of back up and then work our way back to this point, just to kind of hit on these thought processes and like how you went through that process, because I think that can often be helpful for people. Of when was the moment of like, okay, things are not going as we expected it to go, and like what was that first realization and moment like?
Oh man, I think it was honestly before I even knew there was a huge problem. Um, this was maybe around, this was probably 2021, 2022. We had just finished one of our last condominium developments. And I'm the general contractor. I was the construction manager, so I was the one, like I said, in work boots on job sites, making sure projects went smoothly. And we were kind of transitioning from those types of projects to the multifamily value add. My partner was sort of managing that part of the company, and um, I had just finished up this large project, so now I'm not needed on site 8 days a week or whatever it was. Lots of attention to detail going to an $800,000 condo. Um, and I took a step back. I was spending more time in the office, and I was kind of going through. I'm like, okay, what do I need to do now in the company? How can I be useful? What's going on? And I started looking through, asking some questions of my partner, um, going through some of our books, just trying to, we sort of like got by on the financial side of the business, as I kind of was hitting to before. Like, we were always exiting deals, so we always had like, windfalls where we were able to keep things at least generally settled. But I just started digging into it because I had a bunch of time, and I asked some questions, and I could feel that the answers were just like there was a lot of things were not clear at all in that part of the business. And I was like, okay, I think I really need to start paying attention to this. And I had asked a question to my partner, and his answer was, I don't know. And it wasn't any fault of his, and I'd asked this question, and when the answer was, I don't know, I was like, I need to really dedicate myself to this part of the business for the foreseeable future. We'll figure out, I'm not managing, framers and plumbers anymore right now, at least for the time being. We had decided that we were going to focus on multifamily, value add, property management. We were still doing all the value add ourselves, hiring all the subs. We were property managing everything ourselves. We were always in the trenches, but I knew I needed to be really, really focused on that to try and guide that piece of the ship. I think lots of experienced entrepreneurs understand how important the books and sort of the financial part of your business is. Lots of businesses generate revenue. Like, all businesses generate revenue. If you don't generate any revenue, you're not a business at all.
Yeah, you don't have a business. Yeah.
Lots of those businesses that are generating revenue aren't making any profit, or they're losing money and they don't even know.
Yeah. And obviously you're preaching to the choir here with that. Obviously I feel strongly about that. But I think what's also like important to call out is like business is a series of failures before you get to some sort of success. So like every day in a business you're dealing with some signal. You're dealing with both positive and negative signals, right? And it can often be very easy to set up to set like when you get those negative signals up after a period of time, the entrepreneur mindset is that we can work through these problems, right? And so you found that bit of uncertainty. You did some digging into those, like, you kind of said, okay, here's where we need to get a little bit organized. Here's where we need to really tighten some stuff up. Can we talk about, okay, your first go at this was to think, okay, let's just understand where we are. Am I understanding that right? Of like, let's just cross our T's, dot our I's, figure out where are we financially. Is that a fair, like, that was the moment that you stepped back and said, okay, we gotta make sure we understand this in and out.
Totally, because we were transitioning from, if you're building a condo building that takes you just say 12 months to build, your business has no revenue until that property sells. You have cash flow, just as you're doing construction, but your real estate development company doesn't have any revenue. Your revenue is generated from property sales. And so we were kind of used to living in this world of our cash flow was our debt cycle. And then, when we sold something that was successful, there was this windfall. But now we were moving into this cash flow cycle where we were actually generating revenue on a consistent basis via rent. And how to then associate that with, and we still have this value add component, and how to, manage something that is generating money, um, but if it's, how, like, whether or not it's enough to cover its expenses, Sometimes it may not be enough to cover its expenses by design because it could be a value add property that's half occupied and you're making improvements to the other half. And so we were just learning, I really started navigating now this world of we're actually making money or we're generating revenue, but how do we fit all these pieces of this puzzle together? And it was way different than what we had been doing before. You kind of generally think real estate is real estate, and in a lot of ways it can be, but in this way it certainly was not. It was way different.
So you transition from this construction phase and then you go into now this, you have occupied units. Were those units cash flowing at that point? Meaning when you were like, did the model work in that when you initially modeled that once we transition these with refinance, were you now not cash flowing on those units because of the increased debt cost, or where was that?
Part of our entire issue was I don't really even know the right answer to that, but probably at times I would say yes. During the period of 2020 and 2021, I mean, not only were real estate people receiving huge windfalls of cash, there was also tons of tenant assistance out there. There was an eviction moratorium in Massachusetts, I think maybe the entire country. There was all this stimulus money that was being pumped in, and so we had great rent collection months. Whether or not those units themselves were cash flowing, it's kind of hard to say because some buildings were 25% occupied, some were 95% occupied, and we were just running it as one organism, which we shouldn't have been, but that's kind of why we ended up trying to bring it under an umbrella at the end. But yeah, money was coming in, money was going out,
Yeah,
and way
yeah.
too fast, and we were trying to get a grip on it.
And that's when we kind of talked at some point in there where it was like you're trying to figure out from from a tracking perspective. You now know you have some sort of problem. You don't know the extent of this problem yet, but then you're trying to come up with solutions to like how do we solve this? So you mentioned raising additional monies as equity partners was one route that you were taking that would give you the funds to continue with some of the projects. And then the idea was because they're now equity partners, you don't have that debt load over the top of you. You can now make some of these cash flow, and then you just give it time, and you're going to be cash flowing, and then everyone gets the return. That's, I guess, the route that you took initially, right? What other things did you explore in that? Like what other options did you have at your hands? Did like when you're thinking through like problem solving, like what things did you think through as far as what your options were?
Yeah. Well, internally we completely turned over our team. So all of our, what really were effectively employees of like our property management company. If we're trying to kind of silo the roles of what each company would be if we were separating them out. The employees that we had previously, they were just, they were C players, and we completely turned over our staff and ended up with an A and a couple of B plus players. So that really made a huge impact on, not only our ability to just get work done appropriately, but also for me to not have to constantly babysit people, taking my attention away from more business focused growth activities. So that was something that we did. That wasn't necessarily like as a result of what we were going through. It just kind of all happened at the same time, and there was certainly having a bad team doesn't help you have success on the business side, and having a good team can make your chances of success much better. So we did that, and then I said like we have got to I have got to become financially literate, not just not just personally, like okay, well, let me make sure my bills are less than my income. That thing, that's
Yeah.
like I can I don't even need to watch YouTube to figure that out. I can figure. I'm intuitive enough to understand that, right? but like I really, really need to become financial literate in the business that we're in. I need to understand, P&Ls and balance sheets and like how books should be organized. My goal was that if someone looked into our books, because a couple of people I'd say, hey, can you share P&Ls and balance sheets? And these were private creditors or different people we were working with. And I said, yeah, no problem. Like, whatever. We always want to be transparent. Um, and when I would look into them, I didn't have a clue what I was looking at. I was like, none of this makes any sense. And something about that tells me that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to have books that are like totally like not legible. So what my goal was to and like one of the first conversation I had with you was that I thought I needed a fractional CFO, and I know that's mainly what you do, you and your team do, and I had more and more conversations, and what I ultimately realized was that like I, fractional CFO wasn't going to do me any good right now. What I really needed was clean books, and so we ended up undertaking just like undoing 3 years worth of transactions. I didn't really know what a chart of accounts was. I knew what the term was, but I didn't know why it was important or how to create consistency across books. And I ended up linking up with, it was like a referral over referral over referral to a guy who just really spoke clearly, like understood our situation, really spoke clearly about what he thought the solution was and how to get there, and how he could help do what we needed to do. And my goal was that like when I finally now started to understand what the problem was, what I needed to do, all these like various solutions, but the key thing was I needed books that made sense, so that if I handed all of my books to someone who didn't know anything about our business, I had never had a conversation with, they could read through our P&Ls and balance sheets and cash flow statements and get a reasonable understanding of what we did, what our position was, how we were structured, whether or not we were making or losing money, or if we were losing money, how to course correct. So that became really my main goal over the past like 12 months.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And I think it does a good job of highlighting that kind of iterative process of like, you know, when, we initially talked, it was clear you had a lot you had a lot going on that you were trying to sort through, right? And it's that burden as the business owner that you know that there's problems, and at that point you're trying to figure out what those problems are. And it sounds like when you kind of came to that, it was we've got to man the house. Like we've got to get our internal done first before we can do anything else. And I think what's so important is a lot of business owners are in that exact same position where they don't understand the financials completely, where they don't have, like you said, they understand the concepts, but they've not dug into those specific details. And in your particular case, if you don't have the grasp on the profitability on a per project basis, on a per, on a particular, like, well, first on the value add stuff that you're doing, next on the profitability once you get to you know, you get to a building that's completed, that's now fully occupied, plus the debt stack. There's multiple things that are factors that are playing into that and what you're doing. And so I gathered from our conversations and from what you said that there was probably quite a bit of overwhelm with that. If you go back, like you've been at this for quite a while now. Um, what did that do for you personally with your family? Like, was that stress? Like, did that have any other impacts that you were trying to sort through? Like, how was what was the fallout of all of that kind of up in the air uncertainty with the business, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, lots of additional stress that I think me and my family have handled fairly well, all things considered. I mean, during this time, we moved to a more permanent house. My wife and I, who was my girlfriend at the time, we had a baby. I have a stepson with her from a previous relationship. We also have another baby on the way already now, and we got married. Um, and she's way more stressed about money than I am. I'm just like, yeah, I know we'll have money at some point, in the future. Like, she's like, we don't have money right now. Like, I'm like, yes, okay. So we balance ourselves out fairly well there. But yeah, a lot of additional stress, and you just handle it day by day. You just try not to let one conversation become too much. Uh, you just find a way to keep moving forward, and you do whatever it is you have to do. Um, it it's said, but and I think my wife and like family generally like have we've handled it all very well. But you just a lot of things in my life, I think, like, and generally in life and struggles you just go through, like, if you're going to like, live and exist, you're going to suffer in some capacity. And suffering can mean there's a wide range of suffering. Suffering can mean anything to anyone. But like at the end of the day, you're going to suffer and you just got to suck it up and keep going. And that's what I did. That's what I've been doing, and I continue to do. That's honestly just the best advice that I've got. It's not really it's not amazing, but you just keep going.
The simplicity of that is what's beautiful because it is like that is the whole story when it comes to business is it's continuing through. And I had this conversation with a group that I'm in just recently of there's there's stupidity in continuing through and there's brilliance in continuing through, right? The brilliance is Elon Musk being on the brink of bankruptcy time and time again because he had all these things. He had no money, he had nothing. And now he's the richest man, or I think he still is. It's at least one of the top couple richest in the world. Um, but in the same way, there were people that did the same things or did similar things. Maybe not exactly the same to Elon because he's so unique in and of himself, but you don't know where the break is from you being insane and you getting that particular big breakthrough. And I think that's what's so unique about that entrepreneurial process.
Totally, yeah. And there probably were times where it would have been like, at this point I can't really quit. Like I have to see it
Yeah,
through now.
yeah.
Like if I plan to fulfill my obligations to people that I can't fulfill now, I absolutely have to continue to see it through. It's the only path forward. And I like that because I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to continue working for myself for whatever reason, I guess. Um, but I totally think that entrepreneurship is way over glorified. Um, but um, but yeah, I mean, there were times where it probably didn't make sense. I don't know. It's such a tough question to answer, and yeah, all entrepreneurs, or I would say at least most, go through something like this, that sort of mindset question for themselves in some capacity.
So now you're at this point where you're selling off some of these assets. Like let's talk about as you kind of take that transition. Let's talk about that transition of like, okay, here's where we made the decision to do this, and then here's the plan of where we are and where we're going. And let's kind of just briefly hit on that, and then we'll transition to kind of key lessons from this.
Absolutely. So I guess, and part of what I learned through all this was how actually complex of a business this is, and how like you really, really need to be sophisticated. And like I think, it's tough to look back on it now and like scold myself, but like we were stewarding a lot of people's capital. And there's a responsibility with that we've always taken seriously. But it's a big risk to do that when you don't have any idea what you're doing. And of course, you kind of need to find out that you don't know what you're doing to realize you didn't know what you were doing. But, like all of that to say, like, this was a really complex business that I just didn't understand, and risk that I really didn't understand. That I knew I was taking on, but I just didn't know what the fallout of that risk could be. if it didn't go the way that we were planning. So as we started to then, and I say that to say we now said, okay, we cannot responsibly raise capital anymore. We have been doing this for for a really long time. We're getting eaten by this debt monster. We've got to, we've got to just stop the bleeding. We've got to get rid of these assets. We've got the city breathing down our neck from properties that need improvement. We've got issues with tenants. We've got issues with banks. We've got issues with private lenders. We need to stop the bleeding. We need to breathe. So that's when we made the decision to start selling things off, or to just steward them for as long as we could, and then let the inevitable happen, which could be foreclosure. Worst case scenario with the bank. At the end of the day, selling the property probably isn't going to pay off a lot of our second position credit, private credit anyway. So the difference between that and foreclosure really isn't that much, other than, these are in LLCs, so I guess personal credit, but whatever. That wasn't really on the mind. And so we're trying to move out of this, give ourselves a chance to breathe. And one of the biggest things that this is kind of jumping into lessons learned a little bit, I guess. But one of the biggest issues that we had was that the only source of revenue we've ever had in our business is the success of our investment deals. A lot of people in real estate will have, or a lot of developers will oftentimes have, they're a licensed real estate agent, they're a construction company, there are these things that they already do, but they've created an income stream that is somewhat independent of their investment or development deals, so that if their investments aren't making any money, then, okay, well, I can just go sell a few more houses. I can do a few more deals. I can go pick up some private contracts. I have a way to make money that's outside of this. And we've done it at times in the past, but we've never really committed to building sort of a sidecar adjacent, like independent company that could survive without these investments. Mm-hmm. And so that's as we wind sort of one thing down to make sure that we don't have to go get a job selling used cars just to, take care of our basic needs, right? We're trying to build up these adjacent auxiliary businesses at the same time. So that's kind of a lesson and a way we're kind of like not totally pivoting, but just finding a way through this so that we can continue to be in the business of being in business.
Yeah.
And just getting to like $1 of positive cash flow per month. Our negative cash flow per month, if we were in months that we could pay all of our obligations, at worst was like $70,000, like negative cash flow per month.
Yeah.
If you're in value add, you can kind of expect something like negative cash flow to some degree, but like that for years is totally unsustainable.
Right. You said some of these you're going to be able to sell off. Some you're potentially going to have to go to foreclosure. From a investor and equity standpoint, what is your, I guess, primary end goal at this point of where do you think like paybacks and, where do you think you end this in this story with that?
Yeah. Great question. And I know it's something we've been very open about with our equity investors, our private creditors. We say, if making you whole is Rome, all roads lead there, no matter what we do. Our goal is to stay in the business of being in business, get back to positive cash flow. It doesn't matter what the source of money is. It's all going towards that purpose. Mm-hmm. But we need to rebuild. We need to strip down and rebuild. So we're still working through the organizational structure of how exactly it's going to look. But we think it's going to look something like a holding company where everyone's kind of within this holding company, and that holding company owns all of the other ventures that we pursue moving forward. So as those ventures are profitable, they flow to the holding company and then gets dispersed to continue to then start to chip away at that.
Yeah. What are the things that you guys are kind of pursuing from a revenue, perspective now? You said you have these other venture things that you're doing. I assume because you've done GC work before, I'd almost venture to guess that may be part of it, but curious what some of that is.
Yeah, great question. And not GC work.
Not GC work. Okay.
No, I've done GC work for private clients before, and I don't know. It's just not, I'm the GC, and it's just not what I want to do day to
Yeah.
day. I think there are easier ways to make money. Sort of like with real estate being a complicated business, it's also a very hard business. And there are lots of ways to make $1 million, and there's probably lots of easier ways. So some of these adjacent businesses are number one, just being a real estate agent. So myself and my partner are licensed. So he's going to pursue that. He's more of like the natural salesman. If you kind of have an idea of like a salesman might be, he fits that a little bit more and a bit more outgoing, just naturally. So he's going to pursue real estate sales. We certainly, being in the industry a decade, we've got a decent foothold there, and it'd be an easy sort of thing to slide into. Um, and then on the sort of GC slash home services side, we've actually started a pest control company, believe it or not. So it's one of those like kind of icky, unsexy things that like you're like, oh yeah, I had a mouse once and I called a pest control company and they came and did something and then they sent me a bill and I don't know. But it's actually we looked into things that we were already doing that weren't going to change our day to day too much. So like I'm not going to go learn a completely new industry, something I don't understand at all. But what are we already doing that we can just turn into a revenue stream? And one of our key employees actually got a pest control license so we could start servicing our own apartment buildings because it was a big part of the properties that we had, something we needed regularly. And I thought we were overpaying for it and not getting great results. So we started doing it for ourselves. And we were also effectively just property managers at the end of the day. Like the day to day was at this point, like I'm a property manager. I talk to tenants and I fix, I send guys out to fix problems and do improvements. And who knows how to do this better than we do? Probably not that many people in our market. So we thought we could be a really effective property manager for other clients. So it was between those two businesses that I was looking to kind of decide on what we were going to pursue
Yeah.
to generate money and pick pest control mainly because I saw it as a faster sales cycle.
Yeah. That's interesting because it's like it shows that even through the difficulty and even through the struggle of this, like there are things that you learned how to do, skills that you gained that are now providing that launching point for making that transition. And so, while you can say like, oh, well, this was a failure from the standpoint of like we didn't get the original outcome we hoped for, there's still things that were gained and learned from this that ultimately is the path that you now have out. And I think, again, it's really easy to look at things that are going on and think, I suck. I'm never going to be any good at this, and downplay that. Downplay that failure is kind of you related, but the reality is when you look at this, um, you know, you could be 10 years down the road, have all of these people paid, and now have this, successful business and water under the bridge, right? It's just one of the failures and things that happens in entrepreneurship. So when you look at the lessons, we've obviously mentioned a few lessons here, um, of, things that you've learned through it. But going back to the start, can you think of, one or two things that you can think back to that you're saying, if I were to do this again with the knowledge that I have now, here are the ways that I would have approached this differently?
Totally. And there's obviously a lot, but on the real estate side, so like I'll give you kind of like little examples kind of from different perspectives of the type of business we were in. On the real estate side, and the value add of these are old 100-year-old buildings, old cast iron, old heating systems, things that are inefficient that break all the time. I would only do value add multifamily. If I'm doing the same projects again, I know exactly the repairs that I'm going to make from the very beginning. I'm going to empty out the building. I'm going to gut all the bathrooms and kitchens. I'm going to upgrade the electrical as much as I need. I'm going to make sure that all of the heating systems are new and up to date or whatever it is, because now I know what sort of calls that I get that just really eat away at our repair expenses. And make sure you address all those problems up front instead of like wholly, not just fixing, patching things here or there, like getting it working, but making it so you're not going to get any calls about these things again. Because that not only saves money, but just saves generally a ton of time and headache. So on the repair side, I'd approach that in a different way. On the tenant side, I would vet my tenants like I tell them now I'm putting them through a job interview.
Yeah.
If this feels like a job interview, I'm sorry, it basically is. Like, I would vet them extremely, extremely difficult, intensely, and make it difficult to rent a space at our in our buildings. I'd also probably look for buildings in areas that people want to live in, not buildings that people are just desperate for. Will take anything that you give them, because you just end up in this world that you don't want to be in. And then on the finance side, I would just have like I would go into a new project with the financial education and setup and foundation that you need before you start, rather than trying to figure it out alone. My opinion is almost now that like having a background in accounting, finance, bookkeeping is the most important trait, the most important foundational skill to have before becoming an entrepreneur. And I think people might argue, but a lot of people will argue sales is the most important trait, because sales cures all. And while that can be true, I think it also can depend on the type of business that you're in. If I'm selling pest control, yes, sales cures all on pest control. If I get more clients, I'll figure out how to make sure I'm profitable. But if I'm in the world of real estate development and raising capital from outside investors and making sure I'm, making intelligent financial decisions and understanding the risks of if things go wrong, you know, my thoughts were like, if I had understood this part of it from the beginning, then maybe I still have a problem, but it may be a much smaller problem that I could have recognized much sooner.
Yeah, like that's an interesting thing to think about. I think like I would maybe argue this is coming from maybe I'm downplaying myself here, but I would maybe argue that sales is more important because I think about it from a what's the harder skill to acquire. And I think sales is something that you're either good at it or you're not. And if you're not good at it, I think that's harder to learn than it is. I think anyone can learn accounting and finance. You just have to commit the time and make it a priority. It's not going to be as natural for some people, but I think sales is less natural for the people that don't know it than what accounting and finance should be for the people that don't know it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think from my perspective, we really try and hit home on like anyone can learn this, and generally, if you can get it to the bare minimum of the few things that are driving the business forward, you can not have a full understanding and still do well enough that that it works out. Now, on the real estate side, I bet you that's probably flipped a bit, right? Because the real estate side, the finance is so important that then you end up in a spot where if you don't understand the finance, that it's that risk assessment piece that when you don't know it well, I think that's probably where I'd argue you guys made your biggest mistake is you misassessed the risk that you were taking on because again, we were so used to these financial conditions. And it's a mistake that a ton of people have made. It's a common mistake. Um, and when you take on that debt, you reduce your margin of error significantly. And so I think when you take all that into account with interest rates, with the way it was structured, everything else, I think that's the piece where um, understanding that from top to bottom, if you make that one change, the one thing I do think is also helpful with finance is by making that one change, you're able to sit here and you're able to do a better job of getting to of doing that analysis and that iteration that's needed with entrepreneurship. And so I think by understanding the numbers, if you come at the problem solving from a numbers perspective, you're better off than if you're just, shooting in the wind and hoping that you win. And so I think that's kind of a counterpoint to my point that I was making earlier, but
100%
totally. So
agree with everything you said. And, I guess coming from someone who's not really a natural salesman, I was very shy when I was younger. You can absolutely teach yourself to
yeah,
be,
yeah,
I'm that extroverted introvert, right? To be, I'll go knock on someone's door and sell them whatever. I don't care. But like when I was 16, the idea of walking around my neighborhood and asking them to do the, cents per foot for my baseball uh, the fundraiser, whatever we're doing, like you get it however many feet and it gets like cents per foot donated. I was not doing that. No
yeah.
chance. Um,
It's immersion therapy, right? Where the only way to get good at it is to put yourself in really uncomfortable positions, and I think that is something that is a good life skill to have, anyways. Right? Is expose yourself to things that you're not comfortable with, and you'll be better off in the long run.
totally. And
Cool.
we're doing these other businesses for now, but we are not done with real estate. I cannot wait to do my next real estate development or,
Yeah.
uh,
And you bring all those lessons with you, which is great, right?
100%. I just feel like
So.
I'm playing I have a totally different, uh, you know, level of knowledge to put into something new.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks for being open today, Harrison. It was great to chat and kind of work through that. I'm sure that many will learn from this and get to. I think part of the fun of this is we get to laugh in some ways at our own past stupidity, the mistakes that we make in the past that I can look back and it's like, you know, you can laugh at your own goofiness because it's like that's the only way that we're going to continue forward is you can take those lessons, enjoy them, and learn from them. So thanks for walking through the process with us, and we'll wrap it up there. So thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Man, what a story. And thank you so much, Harrison, for jumping on, for sharing that, for being transparent, talking us through the whole process. I think there was a ton to learn from that. Harrison mentioned 3 primary lessons that he took away from the experience that he's had. One, on the real estate and operations side, he mentioned that he would fully address the issues in the building up front instead of dealing with them on the maintenance side. And I think that applies to almost all businesses. We run quickly, we run through the problems thinking that we're all good, and then later on they keep bubbling up, and that maintenance is more expensive than we expected. The same thing applies that so often in business, things are more expensive than we think they're going to be. So if we don't take our time, slow down through that process, we can put ourselves in a world of hurt. This kind of flows into the second one where he talked about he would vet tenants better. He said now it feels more like a job interview. And too often we don't do the due diligence necessary. We don't do the risk assessment that's needed to determine if this is the right approach. Again, slowing down, pausing just a bit, reflecting, seeking wise counsel is a great way to avoid those mistakes in the future. And then on the financial side, this is something I love in that he said that he would take more time to understand the finances up front. This is something I preach all the time and will continue to preach over and over again. It's really important. Even 1 hour per month looking at your financials, digging into the details is going to set you apart from everyone else in the industry, and it's going to give you the opportunity to learn and know your financials in a way that you didn't even think was possible. Hopefully these lessons hit home with you and you took something that you can apply. And I would encourage you to pause right now, think about what that application is, and go ahead and start taking the first step towards making a real change. We'll talk to you in the next episode.